The Rise of Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite that transformed the space industry, by Sora Ahn and Diane Lee Agapalo. The first model of Sputnik, Sputnik 1, was launched in 1957, catalyzing the space race. The space race was a period of intense competition of technological advancements between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Fueled by political, scientific, and nationalist motivations, Sputnik was a significant step towards science, marking the beginning of exploring aerospace technology. Being the first artificial satellite, it released a global shock within its revolutionary concept and creation. The launch of Sputnik motivated many countries, including the US, to innovate new technologies to compete with the Soviet Union, as it was a way to experience the aspect of space through man-made technology. With the ending of the space race in 1969, it reflected how the monumental launch of Sputnik 1 set the blueprints regarding aerospace engineering and helped shape further global establishments and achievements regarding space exploration for years to come.
Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a Soviet scientist who was one of the fathers of rocketry, published a work in 1903 called the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation that paved the way for future technology. This idea was then used for weaponry in World War II. World War II was a total war between the Axis, Germany, Italy, and Japan, against the Allies, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. After World War II, tension grew between the US and the Soviet Union due to their different political ideas of communism and capitalism. The United States and the Soviet Union were both aided by Germany in their desires to develop new technology. For the United States, Operation Paperclip was the American attempt to gain German scientists first in order to advance further against the Soviets. In the Soviet perspective, with Germany's prior knowledge consisting of nuclear weapons from World War II, the Soviets went and captured hundreds of German scientists to assist on their military projects against the United States. This led up to the Cold War from the 1950s to the 1970s. Then came the arms race. The design of the World War II Nazi Germany V-2 rocket created by aerospace engineer Werner von Braun inspired the creation of Sputnik 1, a Soviet satellite with the launcher, the R-7 rocket created by Sergei Korolev. Competition between the two nations with the intent to display superiority through military and politics led up to the space race.
The name Sputnik was chosen delicately. Its translation in Russian for fellow traveler, companion, and satellite reflected the significance toward technological achievements from the Soviet Union. The Soviets announced the creation of Sputnik 1 and launched it October 4, 1957, near a small town in Kazakhstan, Russia. In orbit, it recorded the density, temperature, and the concentration of electrons in space by sending back information through radio signals to Earth. In total, it made 4,000 trips around Earth before it fell back to Earth on January 4, 1958. Nations were caught off guard as the US had been expected to launch the first satellite, as they had already attempted launching the first satellite in 1957, a few months prior to Sputnik. The next aim in the space race between the Soviet Union and the US was to be the first to send a human to space, later to the moon. In the next following years, Sputnik was further advanced with later models: Sputnik 2 in 1957, Sputnik 3 in 1958, Sputnik 4 in 1960, and Sputnik 5 in 1961. Sputnik 2 was equipped to send the first living creature, Laika, into orbit. Unfortunately, Laika's life was cut short as she died only after a few hours in orbit. The devastating sacrifice of Laika gave the knowledge on how a living being would react if it was sent out into orbit. Sputnik 4 was the first to send fungi, guinea pigs, and mice into space in 1960. Later on, another trial of sending a dog to space occurred, as Sputnik 5 successfully sending dogs Belka and Strelka into space. The US, hearing this, felt a drastic gap when compared with the Soviet Union, as they were considered to be socially ahead of the world at the time, making the US feel behind.
After the landing of Sputnik 1, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, the ARPA, was established by President Eisenhower February 7, 1958. It was made to combat the lack of research and development of technology with military applications in the U.S. ARPA helped the U.S. by playing a crucial role in not only the improvement of American technology, but the development of the ARPANET, the first public computer network. This built the foundation for what is now known as the modern Internet. That said, they should have been focusing on the education programs as coming out of World War II, the U.S.'s initial focus for education in their school curriculums was to provide life skills. These life skills would be valuable to the students that didn't consider pursuing any post-secondary education. However, after the launch, the focus of the education system in the U.S. changed as it was criticized, not only for the ignorance of education by prioritizing state funding for World War II post-war reconstruction, but also for the inequitable treatment of students with different backgrounds by limiting them their resources for a higher quality education. Furthermore, teachers were not prepared to teach their students the subjects of mathematics, science, and foreign languages due to their shortcomings of teacher training programs. Students' fundamentals in these subjects were lacking, and American schools started to lag behind those in the Soviet Union. The U.S. blamed this lack of preparation, and the widening gap of education between the two countries was considered a disadvantage for the U.S. Wanting to shorten the gap between the Soviet Union, Eisenhower started implementing changes regarding the education system in the United States in hopes to create an elite generation of our own pipeline STEM workers moving forward. In the same year, the National Defense Education Act, NDEA, was passed on September 2, 1958. Its main target was to give a more rigorous education program in American schools by strengthening the STEM curriculum. NDEA helped give financial assistance for students from elementary school to universities. For students wanting to pursue a higher education, there were benefits of low-interest loans and scholarships. This stimulated an increase of students to continue their education beyond high school, particularly in mathematics, science, and foreign languages. In total, 40,000 scholarships and loans were given out to students who wanted to pursue STEM fields and needed financial assistance. Majority of the funds was used for student scholarships, but the rest of the funding went towards the purchase of scientific equipment and the upgrade of training programs for teachers. Overall, the NDEA providing more education towards science and mathematics opened a whole new opportunity for the U.S., creating a new generation of scientists. These scientists would later contribute and be credited for further advancements.
The improvements the U.S. made to their education system effectively closed the previous gap with the Soviet Union, but public concern was still growing. A wave of near-hysteria panic spread throughout the public as they thought the launch of Sputnik was foreshadowing more nuclear warfare. However, Sputnik was no threat towards the U.S. as it could only transmit a radio signal back to Earth. Even the launcher, the R-7 missile, wasn't suited for military use as it was too obvious to launch a surprise attack. Eisenhower attempted to reassure the public, but it was to little avail. He had no choice but to comply with the public in order to soothe public anxiety. On July 29, 1958, Eisenhower passed the National Aeronautics and Space Act. The NDEA helped provide federal funding towards the formation of NASA. NASA, being an agency with close military ties, helped centralize and manage the U.S.'s space program. NASA's objective during the early years of the space race was to close the gap between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. New advancements in fields such as materials, computer technology, and life support systems that were not thought to be possible were implemented in space exploration.
This goes to show that Sputnik not only triggered the space race, but also accelerated growing interest in space and laid the groundwork for future establishments and technologies.